Hello students, hope all of you are safe at home. I think you are thorough with the previous video in which you have learnt about the conduction of nerve impulse followed by type of neurons, nerves and ganglion. Now let us continue with the next part of the lesson. To begin with, we will learn about two major divisions of the nervous system. Our nervous system comprises two parts known as central nervous system followed by peripheral nervous system. So in a short form we name it as a PNS followed by CNS. So thus you can say that our nervous system comprises two major divisions known as a central nervous system followed by peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, I think already you are familiar with the central nervous system as I have taught in the earlier videos. So central nervous system comprises the brain, which is situated in the cranium, followed by the spinal cord, which runs throughout the vertebral column, or you can say it is enclosed in the backbone. So we can say that thus the central nervous system comprises two main organs known as a brain followed by spinal cord. How about the peripheral nervous system? The peripheral nervous system comprises all those nerves which are emerging from the brain followed by spinal cord, or you can say that all those nerves which are moving towards the brain or spinal cord are emerging from brain and spinal cord comprises the peripheral nervous system. So again the peripheral nervous system comprises two more subdivisions. So thus you can say that the peripheral nervous system, which is nothing but the nerves which are emerging from brain followed by spinal cord and also which are entering into brain and spinal cord. So again the peripheral nervous system comprises two more subdivisions. So those two more subdivisions are known as somatic nervous system or in short form we call it as a SNS, followed by the second division known as a autonomic nervous system. So thus you can say that the peripheral nervous system comprises two more subdivisions known as a somatic nervous system followed by autonomic nervous system. So what is the function of somatic nervous system? Somatic nervous system comprises all those nerves which are conducting impulses towards the skeletal muscles. We know that the skeletal muscles are made up of voluntary muscles which are under our control. So thus you can say that all our skeletal muscles receive the impulse from the somatic nervous system. So thus you can say that all those nerves which are conducting impulses towards the skeletal muscles come under the category of somatic nervous system, whereas the autonomic nervous system comprises, if you remember children, I have taught you It comprises a pair of chain of ganglia. In the previous video, I taught you what is a ganglion. What is a ganglion? If you remember, the sensory neuron had a cyton, right? And these cytons, the aggregate of these cytons, we name it as a ganglion, to which the nerve fibers are entering and are emerging. So you can say that the autonomic nervous system contains a pair of those chains of ganglia which are found in the spinal nerves, right? So all those nerves which have a pair of a chain of ganglion are included under autonomic nervous system. So what is the function of these nerves which are a part of an autonomic nervous system? These nerves carry impulses to the involuntary muscles. Carry impulses to the involuntary muscles. You know that. What is the meaning of involuntary muscles? The muscles which are not under our control, such as our cardiac muscles, the muscles of our alimentary canal, muscles in our kidney, and so on. So if we just look at these two divisions, it's very simple. You can say that the somatic nervous system conducts the impulses to the voluntary muscles which are under our control, whereas the autonomic nervous system has the nerves conducting impulses towards the involuntary muscles, such as our heart, our kidney, our alimentary canal, our lungs, and so on. So thus these are the major divisions of the nervous system. Now let us learn every part of this division in detail. Before we could learn about these divisions, now let us learn about the protective coverings around our brain and spinal cord. So children, we find these protective coverings around our brain and also the spinal cord. So we know that we find the brain in the head region, protected within the cranium, and this brain continues as a spinal cord which runs throughout the vertebral column. Yes children, our human brain weighs about almost 1.35 kilograms. In fact, 25% of the oxygen, whatever we breathe in, within that 25% of oxygen is provided to the brain to carry out its activity. In fact, the brain comprises 80% of water. So the major portion of the brain is made up of water, that is almost 80%, and the weight of the brain in an adult human is around 1.35 kgs. Almost 25% of oxygen is provided to our brain. Now, this brain followed by spinal cord is protected by a membrane, or you can say it is nothing but it is made up of a 3 protective membranes. What do we call it as a meninges? So just below the skull, I am just representing the skull with the help of a yellow sketch. So just below the skull, children, we have a first protective membrane which is found just below the skull, or you can say below the bony part and which also runs around the spinal cord. So this is the first protective membrane of the meninges, and this protective membrane is known as a dura mater. Children, be very careful. It is not matter, it is dura mater. And this dura mater is made up of a tough fibrous connective tissue which lies below the bony part. So within this dura mater, we find one more protective membrane. What I am representing with the green color. And this protective membrane, in fact, it is a web-like structure. You can say it is a web-like structure which has a number of perforations. It has a number of perforations, highly porous, and this layer is known as arachnoid. What do we call it as? We name it as a arachnoid. Children, if you just remember about the insects, class Insecta, we know the spider. Spider is actually known as a arachnid. So since this layer or this membrane is highly porous, it's a spongy web-like structure. It is a spongy web-like structure. So since it is a spongy web-like structure, it has been named as a arachnoid, which is a middle protective membrane of the meninges. Now, within this arachnoid, we find one more layer, which is one more layer richly supplied with the blood capillaries. And this layer, which is richly supplied with the blood capillaries, is known as a pia mater. Children, once again, it is not matter, it is pia mater. So this is the innermost layer of the meninges, which is richly supplied with the blood capillaries, which provides the nourishment to the neurons. So thus you can say that all these three layers, all these three protective membranes collectively known as meninges. So you can say that the meninges is made up of three protective membranes known as outermost dura mater, made up of hard or a tough connective tissue. Within that we find a porous web-like spongy layer known as a arachnoid. So within the arachnoid, or you can say the innermost membrane, is known as a pia mater, which is richly supplied with the blood capillaries, which actually helps in the exchange of respiratory gases, provides nourishment to the neurons. So all these three protective membranes collectively known as a meninges. So in case if they ask you what is the protective membrane around the brain or the spinal cord, you cannot write all the three names. You have to just write the name as meninges. So you can see that this meninges covers the brain and also covers even the spinal cord. Yes, children, this meninges comprises a watery fluid within these protective membranes. So in between these protective membranes we find a watery fluid Okay, and that watery fluid what we find between these protective membranes is known as a cerebrospinal fluid. What do we call it as? We name it as a cerebrospinal fluid. So what is the location of a cerebrospinal fluid? It is found in between the protective membranes of meninges. Okay, along with that, within the brain there are spaces. We find the empty spaces within the brain. So those empty spaces within the brain, we name those empty spaces as ventricles. So what do we name it as? We name those empty spaces as ventricles. So even inside the ventricles we find the cerebrospinal fluid. So what is the second location of the cerebrospinal fluid? You should say it is in the ventricles of the brain. So what is the meaning of ventricles of the brain? Ventricles of the brain is nothing but the empty spaces within the brain. And we also find this cerebrospinal fluid in one more location. Where exactly? This ventricles of the brain continues even in the spinal cord. Children, you can see that. I am just drawing the tube-like structure inside the spinal cord. So this tube, which is continuing in the spinal cord, we call this region as a central canal. So what is a central canal? A central canal is a tube-like structure which lies within the spinal cord. So even in the central canal we find this cerebrospinal fluid. So if they ask you the location of a cerebrospinal fluid, you can write any one of the location. The first location, it is found in between the protective membranes of the meninges, right? Or you can say protective membranes of the brain and spinal cord. It is found in the ventricles of the brain, followed by found inside the central canal of the spinal cord. Children, we name this as a central canal but not the neural canal. Most of the time I find the children writing it as a neural canal. What you have learnt in the last year skeletal system chapter, that is in fact in between the arches of the each vertebrae we actually find the neural canal. So neural canal is a passage through which the spinal cord runs. So neural canal is a hole of each vertebra through which the spinal cord is passing. But we find the central canal which is inside the spinal cord. So don't write it as a neural canal, it has to be written as a central canal of the spinal cord. Now, what are the functions of this cerebrospinal fluid? Children, the cerebrospinal fluid, it acts as a cushion. It acts as a cushion. So probably you would have seen in the sofa set, just below that leathery part, we find the cushioning material, that is a spongy material, right? So when we sit on the sofa, we find it is easy to settle down in that sofa because of that cushioning spongy material. In the same way, you can say that the cerebrospinal fluid, it acts as a cushion to protect, or you can say by acting as a cushion, it protects the brain and spinal cord from the shocks. Children, so you have to use the words such as cushion when they ask you about the function of the cerebrospinal fluid. You can say that the cerebrospinal fluid acts as a cushion to protect the brain and the spinal cord from the mechanical shocks. Along with that, even the cerebrospinal fluid in fact provides nutrients to the cells of the brain and the spinal cord. So it helps to provide the nutrients, or you can say it helps in the inward diffusion of nutrients to the nerve cells, and also it helps in the outward diffusion of metabolic wastes. You can say that is, it helps in the removal of metabolic waste from the nerve cells. I think you are familiar with the word diffusion as I have taught in the circulatory system chapter. So what is the second function of the cerebrospinal fluid? It helps in the inward diffusion of nutrients to the nerve cells, or outward diffusion of metabolic waste from the nerve cells. Along with that, even the cerebrospinal fluid helps in the exchange of respiratory gases, or you can say that it acts as a medium. It acts as a medium from which the oxygen is provided to the nerve cells, and again from the nerve cells, when the carbon dioxide is produced, it enters into the cerebrospinal fluid. Yes, children. So thus you can say that the cerebrospinal fluid has three functions, such as it acts as a cushion to protect the brain from the shocks. It also helps in the inward diffusion of nutrients or outward diffusion of metabolic waste from the nerve cells, or you can say that it also acts as a medium for the exchange of the respiratory gases, that is oxygen followed by carbon dioxide.